Okay, so you want to own a bail bonds company. Picture the sign first, a buzzing strip of neon across from the county jail, open at 3 in the morning, glowing over a lot that never quite empties out. Picture the phone ringing at 2:47 a.m., a stranger's mother crying on the other end, and picture yourself as the one who fixes it. Folding chair, clipboard, pen, a life handed back through steel doors. Picture the cash, thick envelopes under fluorescent light, and somewhere in the back of your mind, a mullet flapping in a Hawaiian breeze. Now picture last Tuesday instead, a folding table with a chipped edge, a space heater running because the landlord shut off the real heat, and a woman named Nothing You'll Ever Know signing a contract that puts her Honda Civic up as collateral for a man she has already decided is never showing up to court. $14 billion in bonds get written across this industry every year. Somewhere between 1 and 2 billion lands in owners' pockets as profit, spread across more than 20,000 tiny operators. One governing question: who actually gets rich off a river of money that size? The answer has almost nothing to do with the folding table, the neon sign, or you. A bail bonds company is not one business. It's three, and each one plays a completely different game with completely different economics. The first door is the storefront agent. One person, one folding table, a laminated sign taped to bulletproof glass, chasing walk-ins across the street from the county jail. This is the version every reality show has taught you to picture, and it is also the most fragile version, thinly capitalized, entirely dependent on foot traffic from one specific courthouse, and first to die whenever a state rewrites its bail law. The second door is the regional agency. Multiple storefronts under one name, an in-house recovery team instead of a freelance bounty hunter on call, and a bulk pricing relationship with a surety that a single location operator could never negotiate. This tier survives downturns the storefront can't, because losing one county's business still leaves several others standing. The third door is the one almost nobody pictures when they picture a bail bonds company, and it is the one that matters most before all this is over. The surety insurer itself, sitting above hundreds of agents like the storefront's landlord, collecting a cut of every single premium written underneath it without ever touching a folding table or a client's crying mother. What follows here is door one, the storefront agent, because that's the version of ownership actually available to somebody reading a Start Your Own Agency guide, the version with a real price tag and a real application form. But keep door three in the back of your mind. That's where a huge amount of the real money hides, and getting there is where all of this eventually ends up. There's a second thread worth holding on to as well. If a bail company's risk really is engineered down to almost nothing, why did an entire state's bail industry vanish in about 6 months flat, taking hundreds of storefronts with it? That answer is coming too, and it is uglier than bad luck. The brutal price of admission starts smaller than people expect, and that is exactly the trap, because small is not the same thing as easy. First, the license itself. In California, a bail agent license runs $622 for a 2-year term, plus a $42 exam fee, plus fingerprint processing that starts around $54, and that's before the mandatory 40-hour power of arrest course required under state law. In Virginia, the number is a flat $900, non-refundable, the moment the application goes in, regardless of whether the state approves it. South Carolina asks for something stranger, a minimum $10,000 cash or certificate of deposit collateral pledge deposited with the state itself, on top of a $400 license fee and a 30-hour course. None of these numbers include the fact that several states, Illinois, Kentucky, Wisconsin, an Oregon and Maine class of holdouts, don't allow commercial bail at all. So the map itself is the first filter. Second, coursework and testing. Most states demand somewhere between 20 and 40 hours of pre-licensing education before the exam is even scheduled, and the exam itself typically requires a 70% score to pass. Fail it, and then what? In some states, a mandatory waiting period before a retake, meaning the clock on your first bond is ticking before you've even written one. Third, the insurance nobody skips. Errors and omissions coverage, typically somewhere between $1,000 and $3,000 for the first year, protecting against the paperwork mistakes this industry runs on. Fourth, and this is the number that actually decides whether the business survives its first 90 days, working capital. Total realistic startup investment, licensing through office setup, lands somewhere between $15,000 and $50,000. That figure is almost decorative next to what comes right after it. Real working capital, the cash cushion that lets an agency actually write bonds instead of just being licensed to, runs somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 because every bond written locks up a slice of that capital as collateral until the case closes. And none of those four numbers include the one relationship that actually decides whether any of it means anything. Because the license doesn't write bonds, a surety does. Here's the trap. The surety company backing every bond is the storefront's boss in every way that matters, and almost nobody signing a bail bondsman contract realizes it. Every single premium collected gets split before the agent ever sees it. The surety takes its cut first, typically somewhere around 10% of the premium, sometimes running as high as 15 to 30% depending on the relationship. Then a second slice, again typically around 10%, goes into something called a build-up fund, an escrow account the surety controls, funded entirely out of the agent's own premiums, specifically so that if a bond goes bad, the surety pays the loss with the agent's money before it ever risks a dollar of its own. That's not an accident of the contract. That's the entire contract. The surety's exposure is structured to be, in practice, close to nothing. Then there's the client-side liability nobody advertises on the sign. Every bond needs an indemnitor, usually a mother, a wife, a sister, someone who loves the defendant more than they trust him, who co-signs and becomes personally on the hook for the full bond amount if he skips. Contracts routinely include consent to warrantless searches of the defendant's property, waivers of standard privacy protections, and the right for the agent to have the defendant re-jailed if his collateral loses value, say in a car crash or a house fire, with no court order required. Add the marketing cost nobody saw coming. Google and Facebook banned bail bond advertising outright in 2018, cutting off the cheapest acquisition channel this industry had. Every new storefront now competes almost entirely on search engine ranking and physical proximity to a courthouse, an asset that can't be built, only bought or inherited. Forfeitures, meanwhile, look terrifying on paper and rarely bite in practice. In San Francisco, agencies challenge roughly 5 forfeitures a month, and something like 75% of those challenges get granted without a fight. Read that again. The cost that sounds like the business's biggest risk is, for a well-connected agent, mostly theater. The real risk isn't the client running, it's a legislature changing its mind, which is a cost that doesn't show up on any spreadsheet until the day it erases the entire business at once. The revenue stack looks simple from the sidewalk, and that's by design. Layer 1 is the premium itself, a flat 10% of the bail amount, charged the moment a bond is written, and this is the detail that surprises almost everyone outside the industry. Non-refundable no matter what happens next. Case dismissed in a week, client acquitted at trial 6 months later? Doesn't matter. The 10% is gone the second the paperwork is signed. Say a bond runs $10,000. A $1,000 premium changes hands, and roughly $800 of that, after the surety's cut and the build-up fund contribution, is gross to the agent before a single overhead cost gets paid. Layer 2 is where the real texture of this business lives, the payment plan. Most families facing a $10,000 bail can't produce $1,000 in cash on a Tuesday night, so the agency offers installments, often with interest built in, which quietly converts a bail bond office into a short-term consumer lender, minus most of the regulation a bank would face for doing the exact same thing. Layer 3 is collateral, and it's the layer that turns a bail bond into something close to a pawn shop with better production values. Houses, car titles, jewelry, whatever an indemnitor can put up, pledged against the bond, and in practice held for as long as the agency wants to hold it, sometimes well after a case has been resolved, because there's often no fast enforced mechanism forcing a prompt return. Zoom out to the whole operation, and the range gets wide fast. A single working bondsman, industry guides suggest, typically nets somewhere between $50,000 and $150,000 a year. A full agency, spread across a courthouse's entire caseload, pulls in something closer to dividing total industry revenue by the roughly 21,000 businesses counted nationally, somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000 in yearly revenue, before a single expense gets subtracted. So far, a bail bonds company sounds like a modest but reliable little cash machine. Fixed 10% margin, a built-in lending arm, collateral as a backstop. Predictable, almost boring. Now, here's the other side of the ledger. Because every dollar of that revenue sits inside a structure engineered by someone else, the surety, to make sure that when things go wrong, they go wrong for the storefront first. Here's where it gets interesting. Everything covered so far, the sign, the folding table, the 10% premium, is the bait. It's real, it generates real income, and it's still not the actual business. The first layer down is the lending operation hiding inside the bail transaction. Strip away the language of bail, and what's left is a company issuing high-interest installment loans, collateralized by houses and cars, to people with almost no negotiating power and often no other credit option, without carrying a banking charter, without most consumer lending oversight, and without the interest rate caps that would apply if the same money moved through a bank teller instead of a bondsman. Remember the build-up fund from a few minutes ago? That's the second layer, and it's where the reveal gets genuinely uncomfortable. It isn't just an accounting quirk, it's the mechanism by which risk gets pushed downward, off the surety's books and onto the storefronts, using the storefront's own premium income as the shock absorber. Every bond an agent writes quietly increases their own exposure to the surety's losses before it increases the surety's, which leads to the deepest room, the one almost nobody outside the industry ever finds. Who's actually sitting in it? The surety insurer. Above all of this, collecting a cut of every single premium written by every single agent underneath it, while the build-up fund, the indemnitor's house, and the agent's own capital absorb almost all of the actual risk of a client running. 9 insurance companies backed the majority of that $14 billion bond volume as of the mid-2010s. By 2021, just 6 insurers underwrote 76% of it. These are not scrappy local outfits. Tokio Marine, Japan's largest property and casualty insurer, pulling in something like $40 billion a year globally, owns bail sureties as a rounding error side business. Toronto-listed Fairfax Financial owns several more. The bail bond office is a retail counter, dressed up to look like the whole operation. The surety is the factory behind it. And the factory built its machine so the counter takes the hit, every single time, while the factory keeps collecting its cut regardless of who walks free and who doesn't show up to court. For decades, the New Jersey bail industry looked unkillable. In its own way, it peaked in the years just before 2013, when a state-commissioned report found that 38% of everyone sitting in a New Jersey jail cell was there for one reason only: they could not afford bail. A separate count put more than 1,500 people, 12% of the entire state jail population, behind bars over bail amounts of $2,500 or less. $2,500, less than a used car. That was the business at its healthiest: a captive market, a courthouse across the street, and a phone that never stopped ringing. Then, on January 1, 2017, New Jersey's Criminal Justice Reform Act took effect, replacing cash bail almost entirely with an algorithmic risk assessment. Judges stopped asking whether a person could pay and started asking whether a person was dangerous. How much difference can one sentence of new legal criteria actually make? In this case, everything. The decline wasn't gradual, it was closer to a cliff. In the first 3 months under the new law, judges processed 10,193 cases and set money bail in exactly 8 of them. 6 months in, a public radio reporter walked Hackensack, New Jersey, with a third-generation bondsman named Kirk Shaw, who pointed across the street at a shuttered storefront. "It used to be a bail bond office," he said. "It used to be the largest company in the state. It closed 2 weeks earlier." The industry itself, going into the reform, had braced for a 50% hit to revenue. By the time the dust settled, one industry representative put the real number at 100%. Not a decline, an extinction event for one entire state's worth of storefronts at once. The afterlife tells the rest of the story. The industry sued, it lost, a federal appeals court upheld the reform in 2018. Lobbying dollars that once shaped bail law across a dozen states couldn't buy back a single client in New Jersey. Within a few years, the number of people jailed over bail of $2,500 or less once more than 1,500, had fallen to 14. And the state's jail population, 12 months after reform, was down 16%. Smaller not because crime changed, but because an entire industry's product had simply been legislated out of existence. New Jersey's bail industry was effectively at full strength, right up until the moment a single piece of legislation erased it in 6 months flat. That is not a business risk most owners think to underwrite. So, back to the question raised at the very start, if the storefront carries almost all the practical risk, who actually gets rich off a $14 billion river of bail? And why is it never the person behind the bulletproof glass? The honest answer is that the storefront was never designed to be the wealth engine. It's the distribution network, the thousands of small, disposable, geographically fixed retail points that do the emotionally exhausting, legally exposed, regulation-vulnerable work of actually meeting a crying family at 3 in the morning. The wealth sits one layer up, with the surety insurers who collect a percentage of every premium written across the entire network, spread the risk across thousands of independent storefronts instead of concentrating it, and structure their contracts, the build-up fund, the agent's personal liability, the collateral requirement, so losses land on the smallest, least diversified link in the chain first. And one layer above even that sits something almost nobody pictures when they picture a neon sign across from a county jail: institutional capital. When Endeavor Capital, a private equity firm, bought Aladdin Bail Bonds, the largest bail company in the country, in 2012, it expanded the operation from 3 states to 8. And its own investors included the Washington State Investment Board, the Public Employee Retirement System of Idaho, and the University of Washington's Endowment Fund, public pension money, invested for teachers and state employees, sitting quietly upstream of every 10% premium collected at a folding table. This is why regulatory risk devastates the storefront and barely touches the top. New Jersey's reform bankrupted local agents overnight, but it didn't touch Tokio Marine's $40 billion balance sheet, and it didn't touch a single pension fund's stake in a private equity portfolio 3 ownership layers removed from the folding table. So when an entire state's bail industry collapses overnight, who actually loses sleep over it? Not the people 3 floors up. The storefront takes the fall. The structure above it just reallocates. Picture a single storefront, one county, one owner, writing bonds that average somewhere between $7,000 and $9,000 each. In a rough year, say a state legislature starts debating bail reform, 3 competing shops open within walking distance, and the advertising ban means new client flow slows to a trickle. That owner might write something like 120 bonds at a 10% premium and roughly 80% gross retention after the surety and build-up fund cuts. That's somewhere around $96,000 of gross income, against rent, an E&O policy, staff, and a landlord who doesn't care that business slowed down. After overhead, take-home lands somewhere between $20,000 and $35,000. Rough year. In a great year, courthouse traffic steady, no legislative threats, a solid referral relationship with 2 local defense attorneys. The same shop might write 350 bonds. Same math. Same 80% retention, and gross income climbs to roughly $280,000. After the same fixed overhead, which barely moves with volume, take-home lands somewhere between $140,000 and $170,000. Great year. Same folding table both years. So what actually changed? Run the 2 side by side, and the gap is not small. It's not double. In a good year versus a bad one, the same owner, the same license, the same folding table, can see a swing of well over $100,000 in personal income, driven almost entirely by forces the owner doesn't control. Courthouse volume, competitor density, and whether a state legislature 200 miles away decides to hold a hearing on bail reform. Same business, same sign, same 10%. A swing that size isn't a rounding error. It's the entire margin between a comfortable life and a second job. Picture the neon sign one more time, buzzing over that same parking lot that never quite empties out. It's still real. People still walk out through those steel doors because of it, and somebody still hands over a folding chair, a clipboard, and a pen at 3 in the morning. That part of the fantasy was never a lie. What was never true is who actually gets rich from it. The bail bond office was never really the product. It was the delivery mechanism, the storefront that absorbs the risk so a surety company, and the capital sitting quietly behind that surety, never has to.